Hey, young historians, Mr. Moran here, and you just learned about the French and Indian War and the outcome of that. And the outcome of that was the British defeated the French. And with that defeat, if you look at this map right here, you can see in the yellow, all this area was at one time New France, no more. This is all British territory now. And so the French government cannot claim this as their own. But you still have people who are French that live in this area. And then if you look at this map in the orange, you can see areas that's claimed by Spain. And the French wasn't completely pushed out of North America. You can see, or the hemisphere, you can see a little bit right here, and there's a little smidge right over there. And then, of course, you got the Russians over here in Alaska. Also, too, sometimes historians will refer to the French and Indian War as part of the 7-Year War, because think of the French and Indian War as just a little part of the 7-Year War, because the 7-Year War, to put it in simple terms, was really a world war. There was a conflict going on over in Europe, too, at that same time, and the French and Indian War was a part of that in North America. So for this assignment, what I'm going to do to help you out is I'm going to read this assignment to you, and also I'm going to add some little tidbits along the way to make it easier for you. So you can listen to me, or you can read along if you like. So the Treaty of Paris, which marked the end of the French and Indian War, granted Britain a great deal of valuable North American land. But the new land also gave rise to a plethora of problems. So plethora is just a fancy word for saying a whole bunch of problems. The ceded territory, known as the Ohio Valley, was marked by the Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Mississippi River to the west. Don't go west, young man. Despite the acquisition of this large swath of land, the British tried to discourage American colonists from settling in it. The British already had difficulty administering the settled areas east of the Appalachians. Americans moving west would stretch British administrative resources thin. So basically what they're saying is, this area right here and all this area right here, you know, Great Britain, you got this land, yay, great, but there's a burden that comes with that. Because now you've got this land, you need to govern it, you need to protect it, which means you have to bring over British troops, which means you have to build British forts, which means now you have to pay those troops, you have to feed those troops. So there's a lot of burden that comes with that, of taking care of that land. You have to keep the peace in that land, all that kind of stuff. And the British were like, you know, we've got some conflicts, we got some things going on in Europe, we can't afford that right now. Further, just because the French government had yielded this territory to Britain did not mean the Ohio Valley's French inhabitants would readily give up their claims to the land or trade routes. Scattered pockets of French settlers made the British fearful of another prolonged conflict. The war had dragged on long enough, and the British public was weary of footing the bill. So as you know, when nations go to war, it costs ching money. And the British public, they were getting tired of footing this bill, paying for British troops to go halfway across the world to fight the French. So, I mean, it was so far removed, they were like, it's not worth it. And so the public didn't want to pay for it anymore. Moreover, the Native Americans who had allied themselves with the French during the 7 Years' War continued to fight after the peace had been reached. Pontiac's rebellion continued after the imperial powers achieved a ceasefire. Pontiac is a Native American that fought with the British after the war ended. The last thing the British government wanted were hordes of American colonists crossing the Appalachians, fueling French and Native American resentments. So they were telling those pesky colonists to stay in those colonies, those established territories. We do not want you crossing over the Appalachian Mountains. because you go over there and, the Native Americans are going to say, hey, get off our land, and start killing those colonists. And of course, those colonists, once they are attacked, who are they going to ask for help? The British government, which means they got to send troops over. So the solution seems simple. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 was issued, which declared the boundaries of settlement for inhabitants of the 13 colonies to be Appalachia. So basically what they're saying is those colonies and the colonists, you got to stay in your colonies, and you have to stay on the other side of the mountains. You are not allowed in the Ohio Valley. And I have the text here of the Royal Proclamation here, and you're welcome to read that if you like, or ta-da, I created a cheat sheet for you. So this is it in a nutshell. So the Royal Proclamation of 1763 said, number one, it stopped colonists from migrating from lands won from the French. It made it illegal. They could not move there. They could not buy land from Native Americans. It was off limits for those colonists. And the reason why was one thing. If they kept the colonists over in their colonies, it would support the English economy. You see, the English were afraid that if you had a flood of colonists coming over in that Ohio Valley, they would establish all these farms. And if they established all these farms, they could grow their own crops. You see, the way that England was becoming wealthy was an economic term called mercantilism, and that is when colonies are forced to buy all their finished products from their home country. In this case, we're talking about corns and grains and things like that, and so that would boost their economy. They did not want the colonies to become independent, economically independent. They wanted them to stay dependent on their mother country. Also, it stopped conflicts between the colonists and the Native Americans, as we kind of talked about, right? But this is a real important part right here, this last one. It recognized the Native Americans' rights to their land. In this proclamation, the king actually says, excuse me, that the Native Americans, they own that land because you were there first, before the English arrived, and no one had a right to take that land away. And this is really, really important, because the King of England is recognizing that the Native Americans were there first, and it's their land. And that was another reason why that they wanted to keep the colonists out. All right, so let's go back to it. Proclaim and inflame. But what seemed simple to the British was not acceptable to their colonial subjects. This remedy did not address some concerns vitally important to the colonies. Colonial blood had been shed to fight the French and Indians, not to cede land to them. What was to be said for American colonists who had already settled in the West? So the colonists were like, hey, you know what? We died for this land, so therefore we have a right to this land. And then also, what are you going to do about those colonists that are already there? Again, kick them off their land? What's going to happen? In addition, the colonies themselves had already begun to set their sights on expanding their western boundaries. Such planning sometimes even causing tension among the colonies. Why restrict their appetites to expand? Surely this must be a plot to keep the American colonists under the imperial thumb and east of the mountains where they could be watched. And to some regards, they were right. As I said before, it was to keep the colonies dependent on Mother England. Consequently, this law was observed with the same reverence the colonists observed for the mercantile laws. Scores of wagons headed west. How could the British possibly enforce this decree? It was nearly impossible. The Proclamation of 1763 nearly became part of a long list of events in which the intent and actions of one side was misunderstood or disregarded by the other. And so historians tend to say that the Proclamation of 1763, this was kind of like the starting point of getting some of the colonists to start thinking about maybe, we ought to just become independent, because those people in England, they have no idea what it's like to live here, and or maybe they don't view us as true British subjects because, we were there to defend British territory, and now that we defeated our enemies, we have a right to this land. And now they're saying, what? We don't have a right to this land? You guys don't know what it is to be living like a colonist. And so this begins the thinking to break away. All right, guys. So there's going to be some questions that relate to this, and you're going to answer those questions. And if you have any questions about this assignment or any assignment, as always, please feel free to visit me during my office hours, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.